A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
When my brother Joe asked me to co-sign for his car loan, I pictured his wide, pleading eyes, like when we were kids and he convinced me to sneak him extra cookies from the kitchen. It would have been the same this time, I told myself. I'd sign, and inevitably, I'd be stuck with the debt I couldn't afford. I said no. What unfolded was beyond anything I could have imagined. It started that night. As I drifted to sleep, a rhythmic tapping resonated from downstairs. Hearts pounding a synchronized beat, I crept down, expecting maybe a rat or a loose shutter flapping in the wind. There wasn't much to see in the glow of my phone flashlight, a mere flicker of movement in the shadows. The tapping persisted in the following days, growing louder, more insistent, like a sinister metronome tightening its grip on my sanity. I could almost hear Joe's voice, chastising me for denying him, but that was impossible. He hadn't spoken to me since our confrontation. Then the dreams began. In them, Joe's once familiar face was distorted, grotesque. He stood at the end of my bed, whispering accusations of betrayal. His words dripped with venom, each syllable sinking into my mind like daggers, making sleep an unbearable ordeal. "You locked me out," he would hiss. "Rejected me, left me stranded." I woke gasping, heart racing each time. The fear lingered into the daylight, an unwelcome specter. I tried to brush it off, the stress was getting to me, surely. But the nightmares were only the beginning. Physical manifestations followed, like my own rendition of a cursed tale. My reflections in mirrors appeared warped, showing a face that wasn't quite mine. The sound of phantom footsteps echoed through the hallway late in the evening. Electrical devices flickered and fizzled in my presence, and the light bulbs exploded inexplicably, plunging the house into oppressive darkness. My phone, the solitary beacon in the nightly abyss, displayed erratic behaviors, texts from Joe appearing, incomprehensible gibberish interwoven with snatches of coherent thoughts. "Help me," one read, pixels distorted into a chilling plea. Yet when I struggled to respond, always, the screen would crackle, shattering each message like so much brittle ice. I reached out to my sister, the voice of reason, in hopes of finding some explanation, medical, spiritual. I would have accepted it all. The moment she walked in, her face twisted with unease, just like she'd smelled smoke thick on a windy night but couldn't find the fire. She paced through the house, murmuring a residual prayer. "Joe wouldn't hurt you," she reassured, though her eyes belied a deeper fear. As she left, the door shuddered with a vigor nothing short of a tempest's breath. Things didn't get better. Mornings brought temporary reprieve, and I foolishly hoped that skepticism and sunlight would burn away the madness, yet every sundown reignited the curse. I tried ignoring it, tried offering Joe a symbolic apology in front of a half-empty makeshift shrine I cobbled together from childhood memories, hoping that somehow, wherever he might be, his judgment would cease. What I couldn't ignore was the crescendo of Joe's car pulling into my driveway one dim evening, its engine purring with malevolent familiarity. My breath caught in my throat as the driver's side door swung open, yet nobody stepped out. I froze, immobilized by the trappings of the impossible, eyes glued to an absence that I swore carried an intent to inflict harm. The car remained, an entity unto itself, omnipotent and heavy within the gloom. The realization struck that it was no car, it was Joe, or some echo of what he'd been, challenging me wordlessly. Trembling, I felt my refusal coil in my throat, a stubborn lump refusing to fade. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the emptiness. Nothing changed, the car still lurked, and with it, shadows whispered secrets ripe with my transgressions. Desperation drove me to frantically research curses, hauntings, any obscure lore that could lend a rational anchor. Everything suggested that my denial had invoked something much older, much angrier, resentment given a ghastly form. One entry stood out, detailing an ancient ritual to atone, a far-fetched solution yet, possibly my only hope. Under a full moon, I followed the obscure process as best I understood, line-chalk drawings, whispers in tongues no living person should have heard, a single personal offering to appease the vengeful. That night, as I spoke the last phrase, my house shuddered, a shiver across timbered bones, and the darkness ebbed until it was nothing more than silence pressing against the walls. Peace slowly knitted itself into the fabric of my home. The car, mysteriously claimed by the dawn, vanished as abruptly and silently as it had arrived. Yet, even now, as I tap these keys, the truth haunts me. I should have just signed for the car. Some debts, it seems, lay deeper than paper, lurking in shadows unseen, in echoes of the choices we can't unmake. For the past 12 years, I haven't been who you think I am, and the weight of deception is beginning to crush me. It started innocently enough back in college, when an unassuming job offer arrived one snowy afternoon, nestled between bills and junk mail. It was from a company claiming to be a groundbreaking startup, promising an opportunity that as a struggling sophomore, seemed like a godsend. All I had to do was assume a different identity. They never gave details, but the lure of financial stability blinded my judgment. I was to become Patrick Holloway, a name that almost sounded like it belonged to someone who lived by the rules, but little did I know, it was more like stepping into a vacant grave. They trained me to meld seamlessly into the skin of this persona, drilling my past, present, and future until there was no daylight between my identity and Patrick's. But Patrick had baggage, a shadow I could feel thicken behind me like fog. At first, it was just short gigs, attending events posing as this distinguished character, collecting CVs of the unsuspecting in tech circles. It was peculiar, sure, but harmless, or so I thought. The money was real, and the non-existent background of Patrick was filled with expert-crafted lies. Over time, however, the jobs became darker, involving sabotage and planting software that skimmed data from powerful companies. I was in too deep to say no. And this is where I should have stopped it all, stepped out of the ill-fitting shoes of Patrick, and confessed, but by then, I was addicted to the adventure, the semblance of power that came with being someone I wasn't. I thought I could maintain control, but my puppeteers were far more skillful. As the years passed, bonds formed around me, friendships and even a love interest named Zoe, none of which I deserved because they were based on nothing but threads of deception. I never told her the true essence of my existence. How could I? She loved the idea of Patrick, an irony-laden truth I had to swallow every day. But as I said, there's more. Recently, I started noticing that I wasn't the only Patrick Holloway. From subtle hints in emails and face-to-face encounters, I discerned there were others, different lives being run simultaneously by disposable men like myself. The Patrick-based network was vaster than I could comprehend. Every time another man failed or was discovered, he vanished without a trace, vaporized before the world knew what happened, and my fear grew as reality settled into clarity. I wasn't a unique deception but part of an industrial operation, a syndicate making use of Patrick and his ghostly brothers like living chess pieces. I tried to extract myself, but every door was sealed, leading me back into a mapped existence. The final straw came when Zoe, tired of my evasiveness, demanded to learn about my childhood. I could feel my fabricated world unraveling, brittle lines snapping under scrutiny. I had nothing of substance to give but cold fiction crafted in haste all those years ago. Before I could even consider it out, the company once again approached me, directly, men in suits who seemed to know more about my real life than I remembered myself. They told me I would be the last Patrick, the endgame moving toward culmination. I felt the noose tighten as they revealed just enough of their machinations to keep me on a precise tightrope, promising safety yet offering nothing verifiable. The final mission they orchestrated was catastrophic, a breach was inevitable, an implosion they intended to blame on me to cover all traces. With only threads connecting me to the other Patricks, I knew the others were being dismissed neatly, permanently. I realized then that my only choice was to confess, tell the fragmented world behind the screen of my shadow, and cling to the hope someone, anyone, would believe me. So, here I am, shedding the layers one confession at a time, carving an exit from an identity that isn't mine, knowing they're likely watching. The truth is, those 12 years, those acquaintances, and love not meant for me, have all built to this final plea: believe the lie was never the beginning, but merely a middle, a prelude to something more ominous and intrinsically terrifying that lays unseen, waiting for its next one. Each keystroke feels like it might be the last one. I have long dropped the illusion of safety. This was never just my confession, consider it a warning. They're still out there, crafting new Patricks, or worse. Next time you meet someone and their story doesn't quite add up, look deeper. What rests beneath might not merely be a person, but a construct of their own unmaking. I first noticed the ads, those customized, eerily precise ads, always appearing just moments after I'd thought of something but hadn't yet voiced it. Curious about tools for my garden? No sooner would the thought flit through my mind than I'd find offers for unheard-of gadgets scrolling across my screen. For the longest time, I wrote it off as coincidence or the sheer magic of digital marketing sorcery. But things took a dark turn last year when I stumbled onto a subreddit dedicated to delving into the mysteries of the digital world. One post caught my eye, titled "The Algorithm That Predicts Death," dismissed by most as an internet hoax, a trickery of data miners preying on the gullible. But something about it chilled me, and, skeptical as I was, I couldn't shake it off. The notion that an algorithm somewhere was collecting data, beyond just our daily movements, habits, or preferences, processing even our unconscious thoughts, estimating our very lifespan, lingered in my mind like an unwelcome guest. Intrigued, I joined a group of online enthusiasts convinced there was more to it than mere speculation. Among them was James, a data analyst, or so he claimed. Over encrypted chats, he explained that in the deep recesses of the web, whispers buzzed about a program called Chronos. Developed by a rogue faction of coders, it was designed initially to monitor health metrics, predicting illnesses based on physiological and behavioral data inputs. But, somewhere down the line, its function had warped and ventured into territories not meant for algorithms, or humans, for that matter, delving into prediction models so advanced they bordered on the prophetic. James swore he'd seen its predictions come true, exactly to the date, for several undisclosed test subjects, shared with him by a guilt-ridden scientific community defector, anonymously, of course. He described cases where changes in purchase history, subtle shifts in music tastes, and even patterns in sleep tracking data had been used to forecast mortality with ghastly accuracy. Still, I remained skeptical until he dared me to test it out. He directed me to a shadowy segment of the web, a place you'd only find if you were supposed to, he cryptically declared. My heart raced as I typed commands that shouldn't exist, letting its tentacles dig into my digital life. A crude interface popped up, eerily devoid of branding or color, just a stark command line with a date so outlandish I couldn't help but laugh. Little did I understand the gravity of playing deity with codes and statistics. Taking this matter meticulously, I decided to challenge the program, altered my lifestyle, diet, exercise, social interactions, tinkering with whatever it utilized to sculpt its dreadful forecasts. Yet, the date never wavered. It haunted my nights, lurking in the background music of my dreams, whispering its unwelcome hymns. Affected, I noticed my reflection growing pallid in tandem with the looming date, a specter threatening to suck the life birthed from pixels and paranoia. Days slipped like sand through an hourglass until only a week remained undisturbed before the ominous prediction. The smoking gun arrived via a televised emergency announcement. A string of unlikely deaths had matched a list recently leaked online by an unknown source from a classified sector of the web. It took a mere heartbeat for my blood to run cold. First were the faces, coincidentally, individuals chronicled in our clandestine group, followed by deathly quietude from a community that once thrived in fervor. The dread within our digital sanctum was palpable. At that juncture, James infrequently communicated, disjointed notions of escape and abandoning everything digital engulfed his elongated messages exhibited in haphazard timestamps. Yet, on the eve of my precipice, his last transmission arrived. Verify with someone credible existed outside the net. They will never affirm its truth because they fear their survival. More a riddle than solace, I embarked on this final quest for possible salvation. Emerging from the electronic entanglement, I confronted, and conquered, my reality through trials in temporal domains constructed by choice, not by lines imbued with arithmetic echoes. Experts dismissed my inquiries with chuckles laden with incredulity. Nonetheless, within every amplified laugh hid an alienated glimpse of acknowledgement, accompanied by the unsaid horrors of having sighted the beast within the binary jungles we erected out of ignorance. Throughout these confrontations, however, one peculiar incident, humored as a kooky subset scenario, that a defunct doctor inadvertently mentioned but quashed moments post-utterance, aroused disconcerting embers suggesting corroborated linkages to overlooked incidents align perfectly with the inadequately explained disappearances. In that thin membrane between accepted rationale and lingering enigma, I comprehended a grim existence persists, forever behind static symbols lost beyond incalculable compositions, perhaps, in a realm thriving where our understanding blurs till forsaken cognition defers to instinctual judgments. I choose otherwise, defying nature and providence, allowing a thought exist until extracted unsupervised illuminated triumph simply sailing within proximities unknown, somewhere unified beyond mortality itself, beyond the omnipresent divide sheltered by encumbered nature. Now, days become nights funneled within every tolerance beyond broken ciphers once crafted for us autodidacts keen on challenging realms we forge alone yet unparted. I haven't slept soundly in weeks, the shadows on my ceiling seem to dance with malicious intent, each night more sinister than the last. I keep hoping I'll wake from this nightmare, but then I remember it's real. Stephanie is gone, and nothing makes sense anymore. We were inseparable since childhood, more than friends, we were soulmates. I adored her, and she got me like no one else. We had dreams, plans, and now it's just me, lost in a world that feels cruelly unfamiliar. I keep replaying the last conversation we had, over and over like a bad loop. She sounded distant, and I brushed it off as stress from work. I'm okay, she said, with that unconvincing laugh of hers, trying to mask whatever darkness was creeping in. I should have seen the signs. Her eyes often lingered with a sadness she couldn't quite hide. But I missed it, and now the guilt gnaws at me, a relentless agony. I feel like I failed her, and in that failure, I've lost the point of everything. Time has become elastic, stretching endlessly through sleepless nights and dragging through days that all blend into an ungodly blur. Sometimes, I think I hear her voice, just a whisper, really, indistinct but familiar. It started subtly, a quiet syllable captured on the edge of sleep. Then it intensified, always at night, always when I was alone with my tormented thoughts. It sounds as though she's just out of sight, calling my name like she used to. The world doesn't feel less lonely, just more confusing. I'm deeply unsettled, questioning my sanity and desperately craving her presence, and yet terrified she might indeed be there, stuck in a liminal space between life and whatever comes after. The very air in my room grows cold when I hear her, and I can almost see the ghost of her figure just out of the corner of my eye. The first time I felt it, goosebumps erupted across my skin, despite the warmth of the room. I can't tell anyone, they'd think I've lost it. Perhaps I have, but the thought of her reaches into a part of me that's looking for redemption. Maybe she'd forgive me, even in death. I've tried to reason it could be a manifestation of my guilt, but something more sinister festers in the recess of my mind, something darker. Last night was the worst. The whispers escalated into a heart-wrenching cry. "Why didn't you stop me?" Her voice echoed, raw and accusing. My heart pounded fiercely and my breaths came in shallow gasps. I could feel an icy grip tightening around my chest, suffocating me with regret. "Stephanie, I'm sorry," I found myself whispering back, desperation painting my words. I was plunging into a void, one with no tether, and it was pulling me ever deeper. As if in response, the whispering stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence heavier than any sound. I might have hoped it was over, but the oppressive sensation of someone, or something, watching has become a constant. Her favorite flower, daisies, showed up mysteriously on my doorstep yesterday, the petals impossibly fresh. No one I know could have sent them. It felt like a message from beyond, a sign, a plea, or a threat. I couldn't decide which. My friends have noticed my erratic behavior, their concerned glances not lost on me. "You need to move on," one told me sincerely, but I'm not ready nor could I ever be. Moving on feels like betrayal, and so I remain locked in this despair. There's a twisted comfort in the haunting, a belief that maybe if I suffer enough, she'll come back, at least as much as she can. But as I relive our memories, I also find myself in darker thoughts, morbid curiosities about the other side, and whether crossing the threshold could reunite us. I realize the draw, the awful magnetism of joining her, of letting go entirely, is growing stronger, the reasoning more persuasive by the day. But there's still something holding me here, a stubborn sliver of hope that refuses to die, an irrational belief that I can still somehow save her or save myself, possibly both. As I'm trapped within this vicious cycle, the question remains, will the whispers cease if I too take that irreversible step, or will I simply join the chorus of mournful ghosts, each hopelessly reaching for what was lost? I can't pretend to have answers, and as much as I long for peace, the thought of facing her wrath terrifies me even more. For now, I attempt to write this, seeking some clarity or exorcism through words, each keystroke a fragile tether to reality. I used to find solace in stories, and maybe, just maybe, if I share mine, it might keep me grounded just a little longer. There's something deeply unsettling about visiting a Dollar Tree at midnight, and I'm not just saying that because it's in the tropey dimly lit part of town. It started as a well-meaning gesture, offering to get groceries for my sister, who, caught up in post-divorce financial chaos, couldn't stretch her budget further. I'm her little brother, just trying to help in the only way I knew how, which, admittedly, isn't always the best. "There's a Dollar Tree near my place," I suggested, wincing internally at her pause. "They have essentials. I can pick some things up for you." She hesitated, perhaps at the idea of living off bargain store ramen and canned pears, but then said yes with a laughter that didn't reach her eyes. So, that's how I found myself here, pushing a squeaky cart under the off-kilter fluorescence, gathering what I could from sad, half-stocked shelves while the overhead speaker droned a garbled John Denver tune. I grappled with this odd guilt that weighed heavily in the pit of my stomach, wandering between aisles painted in bright, garish greens. The whole atmosphere was mildly disturbing, like time had stopped, or worse, looped. It was then that I noticed it, an elderly woman in the cereal aisle who seemed oddly misplaced, more of an apparition than a person. Her eyes were too bright and too keen, fixed on me with a grim curiosity. I tried to ignore her and continued shopping, tossing cans into my cart more aggressively than necessary, yearning for this errand to end. But she appeared again in the canned goods section, quietly staring, her presence causing a cold ripple to climb my spine. The store was empty aside from us and the lone cashier who sat slumped at the register, perhaps asleep. No one else seemed to exist in this peculiar limbo. Minutes turned surreal as she seemed to shadow me, occasionally muttering words that got lost in the ambience. "It's not just the cost. It's a curse," was all I caught one time, and it slithered like ice through my veins. I brushed it off as my imagination. After all, I'd heard the stories of haunted Dollar Trees but only in jest. Yet, the lines of reality blurred the longer I stayed. Completing my list became imperative, and I moved faster, deterring the ominous chill that followed her, but it was when I reached the freezer section, casually reaching for a box of frozen peas, that her voice became a sibilant whisper directly behind me. "Everyone pays dearly in the end," she intoned, a statement that was both solemn and sinister. I turned, heart thundering, but she vanished as though she was never there. The peas slipped from my hand. I couldn't just leave, though. I needed those groceries. Dismissing her as another hardship-clad soul in this broken place, I resumed and finally headed to the checkout, where the cashier's slow, deliberate movements seemed to twine with time itself. I handed over the meager bills, avoiding eye contact, feeling watched. The dingy plastic bags felt heavier than expected, laden with more than the cheap foodstuffs I selected. As I left, the doors hummed open with a hollow sound, and I shuffled out into a night cooler than warranted, suffused with an air of seclusion. On the drive back to my sister's, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to catch a glimpse of those piercing eyes again. The shadows clung to the empty streets, dense with inscrutable foreboding. By the time I reached her apartment complex, the nervousness had metamorphosed into a nightmarish unease. While unloading, one of the bags ruptured, my fault for overpacking, I chided myself, but as I scooped up the runaway cans, a folded slip of paper tumbled out, clearly not placed by me. I hesitated then unfurled it, revealing jagged writing that formed a message both cryptic and prophetic: "Not all deals are bargains, some take your soul for their toll." The freezing air penetrated my jacket, yet the cold wasn't just external. I rushed inside, eager to be done with the night, intending to brush off the strangeness as sleep-deprived paranoia. My sister opened the door, her smile tired yet genuinely grateful for what I'd done. In the warm familiarity of her home, the Dollar Tree encounter momentarily felt surreal. But it all shifted when her eyes fell onto the paper I'd inadvertently crumpled in my hand. Her expression darkened with recognition, and an odd, pained understanding dawned in her eyes. She asked if anyone had spoken to me, and I nodded, recounting the spectral woman's odd words. My sister, once pragmatic and steady, shuddered, retrieving a book wrapped in old, worn covers. Inside was a page with words eerily similar to the message I'd shown her, one she'd found in their old house when all fell apart. We sat in hushed trepidation, understanding then that this was more than a grocery run gone wrong. We were intertwined in an inexplicable, haunting saga beyond our mundane lives. I'd gone looking for routine survival and instead unearthed something that reached beyond the realm of our understanding, something that trailed after my sister's struggles, and now mine. Abruptly aware that this wouldn't be the last frightening whisper in the night, I held my sister close, silently vowing that whatever sought her wouldn't take more than it already had. As I left her place, I cast one final look at the remnants of the night, hoping we would find a path out of this descending dark. But even as I drove home, that same chill from the Dollar Tree lingered in the backseat like a premonition, a relentless reminder that bargains are often tricks, dressed in kind, yet sinister fashioning. Today, I turned 28, but that might be a lie because, in essence, I've pretty much been dead for over a year now. My skin still flickers to life in the mirror, a morbid flesh remainder that someone like me once existed. I remember the day it happened, the day death snuck up not with a scythe, but with a whisper, an innocuous sound almost like a promise, gossamer and forgettable, before it rooted itself deep in my ears, becoming a drumbeat that has echoed ever since. The first symptom was elusive, barely noticeable really, just a subtle shadow at the periphery of vision where none should have been. I brushed it off as the usual mind tricks, something ephemeral delusions conjure on long, uninspired workdays, but the shadows were persistent. I work remotely, which, I don't know whether to call a curse or a blessing now, but back then, isolation was my ally. It allowed me to try and ignore it all, in my home office, behind locked doors, surrounded by silence. But as any addict can attest, running away is a temporary solution. The real trouble started when the whispers began to form words, coherent, longing words echoing for life, for recognition. Human voices varied in cadence, some were familiar, and others foreign, as if my mind was a global radio picking up distress signals from other worlds. Sitting at my laptop one evening, I caught a whisper that sounded painfully like my grandmother, long buried and forgotten, her voice crackling like a fire's memory. She whispered, "Come home, dear," and then silence strangled the room anew. That's when I lost time. Hours, days slipped away unnoticed, consumed in a black void of dead thoughts. Emails from my boss went unread, deadlines vanished like vapor into mist as I absorbed the growing procession of the dead calling my name. Panic clawed at my chest when I realized a week had passed, and I hadn't moved from my desk. I had become a ghost, unbeheld, unfelt by my wife, Sarah, who never questioned why my office door remained shut. It seemed she, too, was fading, her presence a blur some days, and I feared asking her about it, as if acknowledging would make it true. On the night of my actual 27th birthday, our small ritual celebration passed without mention of merriment. Her eyes were vacant, trained not on me but through me. The day afterward, she was gone, the world moved forward, yet I remained locked within my personal grave of darkness and whispers. Days turned into thunderous nights as the whispers grew into sing-song chants, relentless and escalating. I don't remember at what point I started responding to them, maybe out of madness, maybe through an unwelcome curiosity. "What do you want?" I begged my accusers, my own corrupted echoes thrown back at me. "To see you become," they serenaded, in riddled tongues I should not understand. In those fractured moments of dialogue, my computer screen blinked, cloaked in static like an inverted portal, the whispering now digitalized into binary volleys. Each wave a tangle of zeros and ones forming chilling instructions to follow. I ignored them at first, refusing to unravel the pages of dead words they led to, encrypted secrets from an eternal library. My hunger, however, grew insatiable, tugging me deeper into electronic wilderness where rest was for others, and I sped through data cities built by ghost logic in surreal silence. It's difficult to articulate when true reality detached, whether I drifted into sleep or simply existed in a new state of waiting. Finally, one day the whispers stopped altogether, replaced by an unyielding silence. Time slowed to a harrowing crawl, and that's when I knew it was inevitable. I had been claimed. Somewhere in my chest, a cold steadiness thudded, each heartbeat growing softer. I became inexplicably aware of my own mortality, while paradoxically knowing it had already slipped through my fingers. Standing in front of the mirror now, reflecting a ghost with tangible skin, the last year feels like a whisper-turned nightmare from whispered promises I'd unwillingly embraced. Today, at 28, my heart beats in echoes, alive yet as silent as those burning void words that had celebrated me until now. As if bitten by unseen strings, my hands move, gripping a pen, drafting what awaits beyond. My journal quivers on the table, somewhere to anchor the memories or the semblance of what might have been. The reality I knew stretched away, always in peripheral shadows, and I wonder about fading reflections, and whether seeing myself as my own denial. My confession sits there before me, a record dictated by life and death. And still, the words in my periphery whisper hope, though I fear it's a torment wrapped in deceit. My body now serves as a vessel for things I cannot escape. Secrets permeate here like smoke invading willingly locked away doors, and I breathe it in, watching while the world celebrates a birthday for a soul that's been a ghost, lingering at 28. I never thought I'd find myself typing this out to a bunch of strangers on the internet, but here I am, shaking and unable to sleep. It was just an ordinary morning, the sun was creeping over the horizon, casting its first golden tendrils onto an unsuspecting world. I had been running late for work after my alarm decided to betray me, and I was in a rush, perhaps too much of a rush. You see, the road that stretches from my house to the office is a winding path through some dense woods, and despite its tranquil appearance, it transforms into a dark, shadowy gauntlet at dawn. There's this sharp turn just before you reach the bridge. Visibility there is close to zero when the morning fog rolls in, making it a spot that haunts the local news with accident reports every so often. You'd think I'd be more careful, having lived in this town my whole life, but I didn't see him. The jogger, that poor man, appeared out of nowhere, a fleeting specter from the mist. My heart is pounding just reliving it, the screech of the tires, the sickening thud, like the world collapsing into a single, terrifying moment. I pulled over, my hands trembling on the wheel. Panic surged through me, 1,000 what-ifs bombarding my mind. I stumbled out of the car, legs wobbly like jelly, and my heart pounding like a war drum. There he was, lying on the side of the road, motionless with the early light dancing over him like a cruel spotlight. I knelt beside him, my breath coming in ragged gasps, checking for any signs of life. He was breathing, barely. I wanted to call for help, every rational thought in my mind screamed at me to do so. But there was another voice, a quieter, sinister whisper, reminding me of the consequences. I glanced back at my car, the front bumper crumpled like an old tin can, and I felt a paralyzing wave of dread. In a flash, I imagined my life unraveling, my job, my freedom, my entire future hanging by a thread. I know how admissions of guilt work here, where the law and consequences feel more like the swing of a guillotine than the blindfolded Lady Justice. I couldn't afford it, literally and figuratively. And just like that, I was backing away, my survival instincts overwhelming any moral compass I had. I got in the car, every fiber of my being fighting my decision as I slammed the door shut and drove away, leaving him behind, alone and injured. I told myself I'd go to the police later once I sorted out my thoughts, but here I am, still undecided, my conscience screaming at me. The rest of my day blurred by like a bad dream, each sound amplified, the clacking of office keyboards, phones ringing, my boss's droning voice, all forming a cacophonic symphony that was slowly driving me insane. Not a soul seemed to notice my distress or the blood that I felt stained my every move. And then, as if by some cosmic jest, there was a newsflash, a hit and run on that very road, the jogger in critical condition with the police seeking any information. Guilt pierced through me, sharp and unrelenting, leaving me suffocating under its weight. Every face suddenly seemed to bear silent judgment, every eye a prying intruder into my burgeoning turmoil. My friends wondered why I was more quiet than usual, why I flinched at every shadow. And then the calls started. At first, it was just breathing, a soft, eerie rhythm echoing over the line whenever I answered, leaving me chilled to the bone. But then came a voice, distorted and hollow, whispering my name. I saw what you did. Each call lasted mere seconds but felt like an eternity, my sanity slipping with each new message. Was it him? Had he somehow found me, his spirit lingering in my wake, seeking justice, or was it guilt manifesting in my mind, wreaking havoc on my every thought? I unplugged the phone, hoping to cling to some last shred of peace. Yet, as I write this, my heart skips a beat at every creak and groan of the house, feeling eyes upon me in the shadows, waiting. I can't tell anyone. How could I bring myself to confess to such horror? I feel trapped in this spiral, caught between fear, regret, and a desperate need for redemption. The weight has become unbearable. I see him in my dreams now, standing on the edge of the fog, waiting, always watching. The dread has me tired and old more than I have ever been. What can I do when every path leads to my own ruin? I wish I could turn back the clock. If only I'd stopped to help, called for an ambulance, did something other than give in to panic. Maybe then I wouldn't be here, eyes wide open, fearing the inevitable knock on my door. It's only a matter of time before my crumbling resolve is torn apart by a reality of my own creation. How does one live with such a damning secret, a confession I wish I could share with more than just faceless companions on the internet? Maybe they know when your own words betray you, unraveling across a screen. So here I sit, hoping to find some solace or guidance, dreading both the implications of silence and the words now permanently etched into my digital confession. If you're reading this, it's likely because the bizarre events of last night have left me questioning reality itself. It all began with what seemed like a mundane family dinner at my parents' house, a familiar and comforting setting where the warmth of my mother's cooking typically wrapped everyone in a cocoon of safety. We had gathered to celebrate my father's birthday, a man whose only claim to fame within our family was his obsession with perfecting his lasagna recipe, a task he considered akin to an artist creating a masterpiece. The kitchen table was set with the usual fanfare, a glinting feast of layered pasta, rich sauces, and gooey cheeses that clung to one another like secrets held between close friends. As my family chatted noisily around the table, I felt a sudden itch for something different, a spark of rebellion in an otherwise harmonious evening. I reached for the forgotten bottle of hot sauce nestled inconspicuously at the end of the table. It was an impulse, a reckless urge for spiciness to break the monotony, like that tingling desire for a thrill to disrupt a peaceful night's sleep. As I dabbed that fiery elixir onto my slice, I was blissfully unaware that my small act of culinary rebellion would open a door to something far beyond human comprehension. At first, the room seemed to continue as it always had, filled with the lilting tunes of conversation and laughter echoing against the walls. But as I took the first bite, the spice tingled against my taste buds with a pleasurable intensity that was almost narcotic. That euphoric moment lasted only seconds before the atmosphere around me shifted, like a scene in a play where the actors forget their lines. My family's voices drained away into a distant hum, like a radio losing signal, and the room began to stretch and twist around me, pulsating with shadows that flickered in rhythm with my escalating anxiety. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, a rhythmic drum marking the entrance of a creeping dread that clawed its way up from the pit of my stomach. My father's usual jovial face now seemed to hang on his skull like the ill-fitting mask of a stranger, and as I glanced at the other end of the long dining table, where I expected to see my sister's cheeky grin, an overwhelming darkness loomed instead, a void where her familiar presence used to radiate warmth. Concealed within that void was a whisper, an incomprehensible murmur that rasped with the urgency of a forgotten nightmare. It spoke in a language my conscious mind couldn't decode, yet my soul understood perfectly, translating the chills that danced across my spine into a primal panic I couldn't shake. I turned, desperately seeking allies in this surreal battle against the unseen, yet when my eyes fell upon my parents and siblings, they were locked in place, eyes unblinking and vacant, as if they'd been pitched into a trance. I was alone in a room of statues, eerie replicas of my family, and from within those glassy eyes radiated an inexplicable awareness, an understanding that they were part of something I couldn't perceive, a dark reality lurking just beneath the veneer of my existence. Suddenly, I rose from my seat, driven by a primal instinct to flee but simultaneously chained by the irrational belief that leaving would condemn me to a fate I was not ready to comprehend. My eyes darted back to the plate of lasagna now turned cold and daunting, an artifact from the reality I had so thoughtlessly left behind with one impulsive act. And then came the laughter, not the mirthful sound of joyous celebration, but a guttural, echoing cackle that seemed to bubble up from deep within the earth itself. It reverberated through the walls, shaking the family photos until they hung askew, and with each laugh, the shadows in the room grew bolder, more tactile in their malice. They danced around me, taunting silently in a ballet of darkness that told me nothing and everything all at once. Was this madness a punishment for my culinary indifference, or was the universality of hot sauce simply an awakening, an unsealing of doors meant to remain shut tight? I staggered back from the table, my retreat halted only by the chill of the wall against my back as I sank onto the floor, hands pressing against my temples in a futile attempt to block out the resounding madness. But it was not until a hand, one lifelessly cold and unexpected, grasped my shoulder with an unforgiving strength that I realized I wasn't alone in my terror. A presence loomed behind me, indistinct yet real, its breath freezing the air upon my neck, whispering a mockery of existence itself as the real words it spoke slipped beyond my grasp like water through clenched fists. "Do you see now?" It whispered, each syllable a serrated edge slicing through my sanity. "Do you see the truth of what you dared to taste?" I dared not answer, could not breathe under the weight of its ancient, unfathomable malice. With a final surge of defiance, I twisted away, breaking free from its grip only to find myself back at the table, surrounded again by the pretense of family and comfort. They were talking as if nothing had occurred, as if reality had snapped seamlessly back into place, a twisted reminder that perhaps I had never left it. I stared numbly down at the heap of lasagna on my plate, the hot sauce now entirely absorbed into its folds, hinting at no evidence of the supernatural calamity it had unleashed. My family resumed their chatter, unaware of the dim specter of terror that had passed through our lives like an undetected virus. But within me lingered a dread I could neither shake nor explain, a seed of doubt in the fabric of what was real. Desperate, I shoved the lasagna away, the lingering smell of heat and spice curdling in my nostrils as I wondered if I'd summoned something that would never quite release its hold. I knew then that my life would never slip back into the comforting monotony I craved, that every echoing laugh and flickering shadow would forever carry the weight of that unspeakable presence. And as I bid my family goodbye, driving home through the night, I could almost see its eyes in the shadows cast by the streetlights, hear its insidious whisper in the rustling trees, reminding me that I can never escape what I'd tasted, annihilation sealed by the simple dip of lasagna into hot sauce. It started like any other bitterly cold January morning in North Dakota, the kind where the air feels like knives on your skin and the world is blanketed in a heavy, eerie silence. I awoke to the familiar realization that the overnight snow had only thickened, obscuring my driveway under a fresh, fluffy layer. Still half dazed from the remnants of a sleep that had been mostly fleeing nightmares, I stumbled out of bed, tugging on a sweater over my pajamas and slipping my feet into boots that sat lazily by the door. Our secluded cabin was far enough from the main road that if we didn't clear our path by sunrise, we risked being snowed in completely. My wife, Sarah, had been insisting we get a snowblower, like normal people, but I had always dismissed it. After all, in the quiet and chill of morning, the shoveling felt almost meditative, even cathartic. I grabbed the shovel from the precariously leaning stack of firewood outside, the only sounds in the crisp air the crunch of my boots and the occasional yawn of the wind through the trees. To be fair, I hadn't thought twice about the fact that I was out there in my pajamas. It's not like there was anyone around to see me anyway. As I started clearing the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, as if from the surrounding forest depths lay a presence both ancient and unsettling. I brushed it off as paranoia, a side effect of those dreadful recurring dreams, but the sense of being watched grew stronger by the second. I doubled my pace, shoveling with new urgency as tendrils of unease slithered down my spine. And that's when I saw it. Dark, humanoid shapes flickering in the periphery where the morning shadows stretched long and thin, their outlines shimmering as if on the edge of my comprehension. I froze, my breath catching in a plume of frost. They lingered at the edge of the tree line, just far enough to avoid distinguishing them as either human or something distinctly other. My heart pounded in my chest like a tribal drum summoning some primordial deity. I spun around wildly, searching for signs that my mind was merely playing tricks. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, though the crude words faltered as I noticed the dents in the fresh snow, perfect, circular indentations that formed a path from the forest towards the cabin's back door. Each step matched the footprints I'd seen in nightmares where the sounds of broken whispers had beckoned from the shadows. A realization swept through me, these weren't just figments of some fever dream. These were real. Involuntarily, the shovel slipped from my shaking hands, its clatter muted by the snow's embrace. Panic surged. I had to wake up Sarah, tell her about the intruders lurking at our doorstep. As I turned toward the house, the shadows converged into focus, a cloaked figure, dark and immense, blocking my retreat. It loomed impossibly, eyes, or what I assumed to be eyes, glowing with a lightless incandescence. My body refused to move, frozen in place as if the sheer weight of my terror pinned me to the spot. Suddenly, the whispering began, not one voice but a chorus, echoing from everywhere and nowhere, the language incomprehensible but stabbing through my bones with its suffocating intensity. The entity raised an appendage, a hand, and as it did, the whispers coiled into an intelligible command piercing through the noise. "Why is the child not ready?" I was swept under a wave of cold understanding. Somehow, they needed my child or someone willing, someone untainted by the knowing bred from maturity. But, God, we didn't have a child. Not yet. We'd been trying, but the miscarriages had driven Sarah to the brink. The entity seemed to feel my defiance morph into horror, its presence swelling to fill my vision until I felt my mind tipping over some abyss. And then, in a blink, it was gone. The trees standing solemnly as though nothing had ever interrupted their vigil. Heart pounding, doubts churned my sanity to dust as I raced inside, finding Sarah miraculously undisturbed by my terror. I stole a glance back through the window to the forest, where any trace of my haunting was gone. There were no silhouettes, no glowing stares, just the untouched powder of a January morning. Yet, something subtle but intangible had shifted. With each sunrise that followed, I became acutely aware of how our land felt oddly hollow, a place void of the natural sounds of the world, as if biding its time. I did what any reasonable person would. The incident was locked in the safe confines of my memory, where ghosts of snow and shadows couldn't reach. But when night hushed the world beneath a cloak of darkness, the whispers returned, seeping through the cracks in my facade with sinister promises. A willing vessel, they prodded, until sleep became elusive, an enemy affording me no reprieve. Sarah began to notice my habits change, my frantic nature sharp in the clueless kind of way that picks at one's patience. I confessed about that day only partially, dismissing my paranoia with the weather and isolation. Nonetheless, anxiety pried at me, festering into an obsession each time fresh snow hinted at idle footprints. I hoped our home wasn't the anchor for whatever followed us, that if we left, we could escape. Yet, deep down, I feared it was within us, within me. The essence of what fogged my dreams seemed woven into the same veil separating sanity and consciousness. With every whispered reminder, I questioned if it was truly my choice to resist or succumb and bring forth the nameless threat into waking life, donning a mundane coat under daylight's scrutiny. The strange shapes were part of life now, familiar guests in an unwelcome abode. And the terrifying truth was gradually sinking in, the darkness didn't care if I thought myself an asshole for what I'd done, for we'd never again stand unobserved. But would anyone believe me if I said that it all arose from a morning where all I wanted was to clear some snow? I always hated going to family gatherings at my parents' house because of my older brother, Mark. He had this knack for picking apart every flaw and emotional moment I ever had, a habit that stemmed back to when we were kids. Our last family dinner turned particularly sinister and has left me questioning whether I was right or wrong in finally snapping. It was meant to be a small, quiet evening watching a movie with our family and some friends of Mark, who had recently returned home after his abrupt breakup with his fiancée. A woman so sweet it seemed impossible she had ever seen a bad day. We were halfway through a horror flick when a particularly emotional scene came on, hitting too close to home for reasons I hadn't quite prepared myself to confront that night. My eyes welled up, and I tried my best to discreetly wipe the tears away. That's when Mark, sitting across the room with a self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face, decided to pipe up in front of everyone. "Oh look, here comes the waterworks. You still cry like a toddler, huh? Man up, won't you?" His words cut through the room sharper than the knife we had just seen on screen, and the laughter that followed from his friends was like a chorus of taunting ghosts echoing through the shadowed spaces of my mind. I felt my stomach coil like a snake ready to strike, embarrassment roiling into anger, and before I knew it, my voice was slicing back across the room, louder and more intense than I'd meant it to be. "At least I can show my emotions, unlike you," I began, "and maybe that's why she left. Ever thought you deserved to be dumped, Mark?" The statement dropped like a bomb. Silence fell over us, thick and suffocating. My parents froze, tension straining their polite smiles into grimaces, and Mark's friends looked anywhere but at him or me. Mark's expression changed rapidly from shock to something darker, something that, in retrospect, I should have been wary of, reminiscent of an old, sleeping wound being torn open. It was as if time slowed, the room contracted, and for a heartbeat, everything felt fragile, like the tenuous calm before a storm. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair groaning across the wooden floor, and the air itself seemed to swell with an imminent threat I couldn't place. It was then, from somewhere down the lonely corridors of my memory, the warnings I had ignored started to surface, and I recalled the whispered rumors surrounding his breakup. No one had discussed it openly, but his fiancée's disappearance and their sudden separation wasn't due to a simple lover spat. There had been whispers of control, stories of nights that didn't end well, and the unnerving prospect that Mark wasn't just the brother who taunted me, but someone capable of more, far more sinister things than childish torment. In that moment of confrontation, something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of malice I wasn't prepared to comprehend. He took a step towards me, and instinct kicked in. A deep-rooted survival instinct that set my heart racing. My mind flashed to the stories I'd heard about his temper, the reason his fiancée left in the dead of night, never to come back. The room felt like it was tilting, bringing with it a bizarre clarity. I'd crossed a line with someone unpredictable, someone I should have feared rather than challenged. I mumbled an apology, my voice barely audible over the rush of blood in my ears, and excused myself, stumbling into the cold, damp night. Outside, the wind howled like a beast from the depths, giving voice to the fierce whirling inside me. The night cloaked me, reminding me of all the times I had felt insignificant, but no longer safe, now submerged in a sea of my own making. I stumbled home under the weight of all I had uncovered, the quiet darkness my only companion, wondering if I'd not only incited a family feud but unearthed the true reason behind my brother's broken engagement, a secret that even now threatens to invade my every waking moment. And I can't shake the feeling that I've invited something dreadful into my life just by speaking those words, by cracking the facade of family harmony, provoking something in Mark that cannot be undone. Now, as I sit here writing this, each creak of the floorboards and every whispering gust sends chills down my spine. Part of me wonders if I'm merely awaiting retribution for speaking the harsh truth no one dared to face, or worse, waiting for Mark himself to come knocking. I can't tell if the shadows at my window are just a trick of the night or if they're carrying his lurking silhouette, awaiting a moment of confrontation I may not survive. When my brother Mark announced his engagement to Emily, our family was overjoyed. Emily was a pleasant enough woman, albeit with extravagant tastes, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. The trouble started when I was dragged, quite against my will, into the whirlwind of wedding planning. It was during one particular evening, under the dim glow of my living room lights, that Mark proposed the idea of me hosting the bridal shower. "It's what Emily wants," he insisted, his eyes pleading, a subtle desperation in his voice that I couldn't ignore. After some hesitation, I agreed, promising to plan a modest event. But Emily's idea of modesty turned out to be something extraordinarily different. The list of demands I received was more akin to a celebrity wedding than a pre-wedding party. She wanted an elaborate venue draped in costly silks, hors d'oeuvres prepared by renowned chefs, and a live band flown in from out of state. It was clear, even from the outset, that Emily's expectations far exceeded any rational budget. I tried to reason with Mark, outlining the financial lunacy of spending tens of thousands on a bridal shower, but he was ensnared in Emily's vision, blind to any practical concerns. So there I was, caught in a tangled web of familial obligation and financial sanity, struggling to set a boundary. Then came the chilling phone call late one night. It was Emily, her voice syrupy yet edged with steel. "I hear you're not on board with my vision," she intoned, slipping into the conversation with the grace of a serpent. I attempted to explain my stance, emphasizing the importance of practicality. At first, her silvery laughter seemed harmless, but as the conversation deepened, her tone turned sinister. She dangled my brother's affection like a carrot on a stick, insinuating that any non-compliance on my part would lead to a familial rift. I felt like I was bargaining with a fairy tale witch, where agreeing to the terms meant sacrificing something far more precious. As we spoke, the hum of static on the line grew louder, and I realized with mounting terror that Emily was not alone. Her words were interspersed with a low murmur, not quite audible, the sort of echo that sent shivers down one's spine. It was as if another presence latched onto the call, whispering in a language my ears couldn't comprehend. I was thrust into a liminal space, one foot in the rational world and the other teetering on the edge of something profoundly unnerving. Hanging up, the room seemed darker, shadows shifting in corners like silent sentinels. I shrugged it off as mere exhaustion, yet sleep eluded me that night, my mind haunted by Emily's unnerving insistence. The next morning, I resolved to stand firm, initiating a casual conversation with my family about the ludicrousness of it all. To my horror, they seemed entranced, speaking of Emily's desires as if bound by an invisible thread. Each suggestion for the bridal shower was met with enthusiasm, despite my objections being clear and logical. It was like they were charmed, their eyes glossed over with a strange fervor, Emily's will fanning the flames of their excitement. Was I the only one immune to whatever enchantment she'd cast? Desperation clawing at my insides, I ventured online, seeking advice under the guise of anonymity. The waves of virtual empathy washed over me, but a nagging sensation of being watched gnawed at my core. Several comments stood out, their phrasing familiar, the words mirroring Emily's voice. Paranoia took root, whispering that she had threads reaching into the digital ether, manipulating perceptions even online. Every night, the static-filled whispers haunted me, sometimes coming through my phone, other times while I lay, bleary-eyed, trying to sleep. Then, one particularly oppressive evening, as I sat alone, phone in hand, it buzzed with the vibration of an incoming call. Unknown number. Answering it seemed foolish, yet compelled by some unseen force, I accepted. The whispering was louder now, and unmistakably, it was Emily's voice overlaid with another, ancient and chilling. "You'll join us, won't you?" It was not a question but an expectation, a subtle coercion wrapped in charm's guise. My protest was immediate, visceral, my conviction steeled by desperation. "No, I will not," I declared into the void, shutting off the phone with trembling hands. But the room was cold, an echo of my words lingering as the air thickened with an oppressive gloom. Objects seemed to shift at the edges of my vision, and the unmistakable scent of lavender, Emily's perfume, permeated the room, a phantom presence. Days passed and reality seemed to blur, the boundary between fear and certainty dissolving whenever Emily was near. Her presence suffused my waking life with dread, an omnipresent specter manipulating my family, cast in shadows I could not dispel. Weaving in and out of conversations, she twisted truths until one night, when desperation birthed madness. A family dinner spiraled into chaos the moment I challenged her, my declaration like a spark igniting dry tinder. The others sat spellbound, their eyes reflecting the gathering storm, and as Emily spoke, her voice was a susurrus of command overriding my reality. But as her facade crumbled, beneath the elegance and allure, I glimpsed the darker truth, a hollow emptiness, an insatiable hunger cloaked in charm. Confronting her was like staring into an abyss, each moment stretching into eternity, filled with dark promises and chilling echoes. Ancestral shadows danced behind her eyes, enigmatically commanding and inextricably linked to ancient revelries I dared not fathom. That night marked the beginning of liberation, the moment I became the outcast, but a free one, a pariah holding on to frayed sanity in exchange for truth. Even though my family's derision echoed in my heart, and the ghostly whispers still lingered in the crevices of my mind, I understood, I was no longer ensnared by Emily's sinister charm. Reclaiming my own boundaries came at a price, a familial fracture, an emotional chasm, but in that sacrifice, I found salvation, a reprieve from the clutches of something unfathomably dark, submerged beneath the sheen of wedding bliss. I never thought I'd be the one writing here, sharing something so bizarre it might shatter illusions of sanity, yet here I am. It started when Alice, my cheerful 8-year-old daughter, began exhibiting some unsettling behavior, something that has gnawed at the very edges of my reality. We live in a quiet suburb, where neighbors exchange smiles over fences, and the most scandalous gossip involves stray cats and misplaced garden gnomes, nothing ever happens here. But everything shifted within the walls of my own home about 3 months ago. It was an ordinary evening when I realized something was not right with Alice. Although incidents began subtly, like when I found her speaking softly to the closet as if it were a friend. "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" I asked lightly, half expecting an imaginary friend, a rite of passage for children her age. Alice simply turned to me, her face a mask of confusion, and said, "Can't you see him, Mommy? It's Owen. He says he's from before." A chill crept down my spine, but I dismissed it, assuming it was just an odd phase. But over time, her conversations grew more complex, involving details that an 8-year-old could not have concocted. They were full of a history she had never learned, with chaotic whispers of places and times none of us had ever been. Then came the drawings. At first, they seemed like the typical scribbles of a child, vibrant and rough. But soon, they evolved into unsettling depictions of faces that were almost lifelike in their grotesqueness, accompanied by strange symbols that seemed ancient, etched with an eerie precision. My husband, James, reassured me, attributing her creativity to our genes as he was an artist himself in college. I tried to shake the growing unease, but then there were the nights where shadows seemed to live within her room, moving inexplicably as if her words had summoned unseen guests. One stormy night, power flickered from the heavens, the room falling into an ominous glow, and I heard a muffled giggling from her room. I opened the door stealthily, only for the light to burst back alive, revealing Alice mid-conversation with thin air, her gaze unsettlingly focused. The room went cold, the type of cold you feel in your bones, despite the howling summer winds. "He says the light hurts him," Alice explained nonchalantly, pointing to the oldest corner of the room, a spot that had always inexplicably felt a degree colder than the rest. I took a step back, feeling a presence pass through me like a gust of winter, whispering in a tongue that was both familiar and foreign. The sensation left me breathless, and it was the following morning I noticed the bruises. Faint, translucent markings on Alice's arms, shaped like fingerprints but disappearing much too quickly to be examined closely. Desperation drew me to a historian friend, hoping to claw at any semblance of an explanation. "The symbols," he muttered, squinting at the papers Alice had covered with her eerie artistry. "These are sigils, ancient ones, used in rituals to summon entities, supposedly." Supposedly. The word echoed in my mind, roiling with the impossible jumble of fear and denial. Yet, all the while, Alice remained unfazed, her once bright demeanor becoming more detached, as if she were being pulled elsewhere, piece by piece. I soon started experiencing sleep disturbances, vivid nightmares where shadowy figures would beckon me, scalding me with their icy touch. Shadows that resembled the faces Alice had drawn, as if trying to reach out beyond the canvas into her waking world. I would wake to find Alice standing by her bedside, staring at James or me, her eyes cloudy as if she weren't herself. When confronted, Alice mentioned rememberings of another era, flashes of life interwoven with ours. She called them echoes, fragments of past lives yet to fade away completely. "Owen says it will be okay," she'd repeat, her voice a thing of comfort despite the horror of her words. We sought help, a psychologist, who dismissed it as a vivid imagination seeking attention, completely ignoring the etched oddities continuing to scratch across our reality. But James and I knew. There was something inexplicably altered about our daughter, a tether linking her to her world and another we could never understand. The final straw snapped quiet as a winter breeze the night I awoke to find Alice gone. Frantic, we searched the house, only to see the front door ajar, swinging open slowly as if summoned. We found her at the edge of the woods at the border of our neighborhood, standing under the haunting stare of the full moon. I shouted her name, but she simply turned and grinned with an expression that was not hers. It was a smirk too mature, too knowing. Her eyes danced with shadows, flickering entities neither dead nor alive but caught between what was and what could never be. "Owen wants me to come home," she said, and her voice, chillingly calm, echoed in the night air. It took everything in us to pull her back, and in that moment of contact, time lost meaning, and a flurry of echoes surged within, the sensation of multiple lives intertwining. We saw glimpses of Alice in different times, different eras, always alongside the enigmatic silhouette of a little boy, Owen, his eyes like bottomless pits holding secrets of forgotten worlds. Since that night, Alice sleeps better, or at least she pretends to. There's a tranquility that she exudes now, one that's oddly unnatural, knowing. But I no longer feel safe under the same roof, as if I'm sharing my daughter with something beyond my comprehension. The bedroom corner is colder still, and sometimes, Reflections in the mirror seem to lag, replaying moments in a disjointed echo as if time there does not adhere to the same rules. We're reaching out to specialists in paranormal studies, as much as the idea terrifies us, for the gravest fear lies in not knowing what we have allowed into our lives. All I know is, something is not right with Alice, and whatever it is, it's growing stronger with each passing day.